at the outset, I should thank the Khaki Lab for giving me this opportunity to communicate with the interested people, especially those who want to know about the history of Pune, especially ancient history of Pune. Because Pune has been very famous for its association with Shivaji, and then all the freedom fighters, the social reformers, Ganesh everything. But we hardly know anything about the Pune which was there before Shivaji. So I have focused my talk basically on this period where we see the earliest settlements of Pune, that is actually 1.5 lakhs years of from now to around 11 to 12, 13th centuries. So we won't discuss anything about Shivaji or Peshwas or the social reformers or the Britishers or the Indian freedom movement. So to begin with, we know, actually everybody knows where Pune is located, but generally I show this map to for people who are not aware of the geography of India, where Pune is actually located. It is here, which is Maharashtra, and which is called as the cultural. Pune is called as the cultural capital of Maharashtra. Pune is known by various adjectives, like it's also known as the pensioners' paradise. Pune is also known as the Oxford of the East. And see, because of the excellent weather conditions which used to be there, because I know many participants today are from Pune, they would know what I am telling about. But then it used to be very nice weather in Pune previously, and no water shortage at all, because we have very good river systems in and around Pune. But Pune has also been famous for all these things, whatever you are seeing here. This is the map of the district Pune, because Pune is the district headquarter today, and there are many other talukas and villages in around Pune. But then Pune is famous because when you go to Pune, you can stay there and you can visit many places which are in and around Pune. And some of the most famous places are these Buddhist caves. Then you can see Shaniwarwada, you can see Sinhagad, you can see the memorials of Dnyaneshwar, Tukaram, and of course Lokmanya Tilak. There are these palaces, this palace of Shaniwarwada of the Peshwas. And we also have the Pune University, which is also famous and giving education to so many lakhs of students. Plus, recently Pune has become the IT hub also. But we are not going to deal with any of this in this talk. But we'll go back to the antiquity of Pune, which we find in the form of these remains. See, when you try to see the history of a particular place or region or nation, then there are various sources to see the history, to understand the history. But then for this particular phase of the history of any region, you have only the material evidences. But we can also have the literary sources, we can have the literary evidences, we can also have the oral traditions. But for this particular period, that which is called as the Stone Age, we hardly have anything other than the material evidences. But these material evidences, these material sources are available in abundance in case of Pune. Scholars have done a lot of surveys in and around Pune. Some of you might know that Pune is surrounded by various hills, and all these hills were the resting places of the Stone Age man, because we have found stone tools, the tools which the ancient man, the Stone Age man, had made for his own survival. He used to kill the animals, he used to dig out the roots of the plants and eat them. He used to cut things with the microlith blades like these. So these are called as the stone tools, the tools which man had made in his own age, which is called as Stone Age because he was using stones for his own subsistence. So here, when we see the locations in Pune, especially the Vetal Hill, which is behind the Law College, then Yeravda, which is famous for the Deccan College also, and in the campus of Deccan College also, stone tools have been found by the veteran archaeologist Dr. H.D. Sankalia. Plus, in the river bed of the Mutha River near the Dattawadi region, such stone tools have been found by Dr. S.N. Rajguru. So many scholars who have been surveying the regions in and around Pune have found the evidences of the habitation of the Stone Age man, right from the Paleolithic phase through the Mesolithic phase in the Chalcolithic phase also. As some of you might know that Maharashtra doesn't have clear Neolithic evidence of clear Neolithic phase over here, but we do have evidences of the Paleolithic, Mesolithic and Chalcolithic habitations in Maharashtra and especially in Pune district also. So here when we start talking about the antiquity of Pune and humans living in the regions of Pune, we should go back to at least 1.5 lakhs of years when we see such stone tools were made. These are the tools which were made by man living in the Paleolithic age, which is the old Stone Age, the oldest Stone Age. Paleos is ancient and lithos is stone. So we have these terms coming in, like the old Stone Age is called as Paleolithic. The middle Stone Age is called as Mesolithic, where you have you can see the change in the type of making the tools. Here, one single tool or this single blade was not used for the subsistence. In fact, it used to be a composite tool, and man used to attach all these blades, small blades made on minerals. That's why they are very sharp in a bone or in the shaft of or a stick of wood or something like that, and he used to use the composite tool to kill the animal or to cut the flesh and something like that. So here we see the change of technology in the Mesolithic period, and we have the evidences of them in Pune again, where which indicates the Paleolithic phase of stone tool making, and here this is the Mesolithic age, the middle Stone Age. And those stone tools, which are very small in size, are also called as microliths or the microlithic tools. So these microlithic tools were made during the Mesolithic period, and veteran Indologist D.D. Kosambi and many others also had surveyed the regions like the Pashan Hills, Veta Hill, then hills facing the NCL and Vaiduvadi burial ground, etc. In all these regions, they had found the evidences of the microliths. The microlithic tools were discovered, indicating that the man living in the Mesolithic period was staying there for some time at least, and then he discarded his tools and he went ahead somewhere else. But then when we try to see the region around Pune, we find that even in Jejuri, Saswad, Morgaon, Theur, even on the Lohagarh fort and even at Mayoli, we have found such microlithic tools indicating the Mesolithic habitation in these regions also. It is not this shouldn't be a surprise for us, because wherever there was good natural resources available, ancient man used to live. But the most interesting thing comes in the form of the Chalcolithic phase, which is called as the Proto History, when we see the division, which is an artificial division of Indian history into prehistory, proto history, and historical phase of Indian history. So here, before proto history, we saw the prehistoric period of Indian history, and now what we see is the proto historic phase, where we have the remains in the form of material sources. The material remains in the form of the stone tools. Not only stone tools, but even copper was used during this particular period. And some of you might know that the Harappan people also lived in this particular phase. This particular phase is called as proto-history because this is neither prehistory nor history. But here we see the beginning of history in certain way, because we have the sources in the form of the material evidences as well as the literary sources. The Vedas were also written during this period, but unfortunately we cannot match these two sources, and that is why we have kept this particular phase of Indian history separately, calling it as the proto-history or proto-historic phase. So during this proto-historic period, we find that there were Chalcolithic habitations. What is Chalcolithic? The people who were using chalcos, meaning copper or bronze, and lithos, that is stone. So they were using stone tools, but they had also developed the technology, had also developed in making the copper tools, copper vessels, implements, etc. So they were using both the metal as well as the stone, but then they couldn't write. I mean, we have not found any writings of these people in the form of the material evidence, but parallel to these people, we also see the existence of the Vedic people who were writing those Vedas and the other Vedic literature. So in Pune, what we find is that these are the people who were living in the post-Harappan phase. See, Harappan period also comes in Proto History, which is also called as Chalcolithic. But then this Chalcolithic is called as the Deccan Chalcolithic, which came a little bit later, that is after the decline of the Harappan civilization. So what we generally consider, I mean, the scholars believe that after the decline of the Harappan civilization, people started migrating to different parts of the country, and some of them came to even Nagar district. There is a place called as Daimabad in Nagar district, and then another place called as Inamgaon, which is near Pune, where these people were they had settled down, and then they lived there for a long time. You can see the time frame over here. More than around 1,000 years habitation was there in Inamgaon. And then we find that it's not the only site that we have in Pune district. There are many other sites, and this Chalcolithic culture had spread all over Maharashtra in different parts of various districts, but then especially near the river systems. So here what we see that these are the sites, very important sites near Pune, of the Chalcolithic phase, where we have Chandoli, which is on the Pune Nasik road. Then we have Inamgaon. This is in near Shirur in near Nagar, Ahmednagar. Then Valki, Theur, Sashtewadi, Koregaon Bhima, Songaon. So all these are very important Chalcolithic habitation sites, but out of them, Inamgaon is the most important. It was the most extensive site, huge site, which was excavated for more than 13 years by the Deccan College. And you can see the publication of the report of the excavations at Inamgaon, which was carried out by the Deccan College itself. Dr. M.K. Dhawaikar, Padma Shri Dr. M.K. Dhawaikar, who is no more now, was the chief excavator of the excavation, and he had in those days he had utilized all the modern technologies to interpret the data which he had unearthed. This is considered as an ideal report in India till today. Even today, when you talk about an ideal, the best excavation report, then people point out to this report of Inamgaon. So this is a very important place, a very important excavation, and a very, very important publication also. We see the remains kept in the Deccan College Museum, where we also see the reconstruction of the whole site of Inamgaon over there. If you happen to come to Pune and if you have time, you can organize a visit to Deccan College Museum. It's a wonderful museum and which tells you a lot about the habitation in India actually, right from the Paleolithic phase to the modern one. So such pots were found in Inamgaon, then even Nevasa and many other places. And this typical pot having a spouted jar is a very peculiar pot of the Chalcolithic period, which was also discovered during this excavation. Then we go ahead and you'd be surprised to know that even in Pune itself, we have Chalcolithic habitation levels. So this particular aerial photograph shows you the confluence of the river Mula and Pauna at Sangvi, in Sangvi. Sangvi is a suburb of Pune on the way to Chinswad. So here what we see is there is a confluence of two rivers, Mula and Pauna over here. And then at the confluence where actually the two rivers meet, this is supposed to be a sacred place. We know that the river confluences are considered as pilgrim places. There are sacred spots where people would go have. There generally are temples over there. They take bath in the water and then they believe that they have achieved a lot of merit. So here when we see when we go to this place called as Sangvi, where the Mula river meets Pauna, we find that there probably was or probably is a Chalcolithic level in that region, because on the surface, in the surface survey, Chalcolithic potsherds were discovered, and then indicating that the mound itself had Chalcolithic levels. Unfortunately, the excavations have not been carried out till today. But then this, in fact, I and my one of my friends, Miss Varada Khadatkar, both of us have discovered this particular site. And then here we find that there is a hero stone which is preserved over there in the campus of a temple. There are remains of an early medieval temple in on this particular mound, where we'll see now. It's called as the Triveni Sangameshwar Mandir. People believe that these three courses, the three streams, make this a Triveni Sangam. It's not the case, in fact. This is a Sangam or confluence of two rivers only. When it's Triveni Sangam, you have three rivers coming together, which happens at Prayag near Allahabad. So these are the remains of this Triveni Sangameshwar Mahadev temple. This is the Shivalinga which has been kept out of the modern small shrine. And then this is a very eroded hero stone which has been exposed to the weather conditions for at least 1,000 years. So it's been standing over there and indicate those who can read a hero stone will see that this is a cattle raid hero stone where during the cattle raid a person was killed while defending his cattle and the habitation, and then in his memory this memorial stone was erected by the people living in the village or his own family or the chief of the community. We don't know because there is no inscription as such, but the hero stone and its erosion and the carvings, they tell us that the date should be of around 11th 12th century CE. So there has at least been a continuous habitation over here from 12th century CE, and then this is the confluence of the rivers, and this is the place, this is the beginning of the mound where the potsherds were discovered. Along with his, when D.D. Kosambi had done his survey, he had reported some megalithic sites in and around Pune. The most famous megalithic site which was reported by D.D. Kosambi was in Bhosri. Bhosri is a modern, many of you know that there is a MIDC, modern industrial area in Bhosri, and then they have flattened down, they have cleared the land, and many big companies have been erected over there. Plus, near Theur, on the Pune Solapur road, up to Theur, many megalithic burials were also noted by D.D. Kosambi. In fact, he believes in some of his literature, he has written it out. He says that these are the cult spots of the megalithic people. And probably, and we can know what a megalithic funerary monument is, because in one of the last lectures, Mr. Bhagat had shown us the megalithic sites of Vidarbha. So there we had seen the megalithic circles, which in fact are the funerary monuments. Underneath, we have the burial. So he says that as these are funerary monuments, and sometimes you see very large boulders kept near the funerary monuments, and he says that probably these are the cult spots where the communities, the descendants of those megalithic people would come on some day during the year and offer their prayers or something like that. So in all these regions, Dr. Kosambi had discovered the megalithic sites. Plus, near Inamgaon, another very important megalithic burial was noted and excavated. Called as the place was called as Pimple Suti. So that is also an important place, and the excavators of Inamgaon had also observed that some people on a particular day of the year come there and they worship the megalithic burial over there. And then the most important thing is that at Pimple Suti, when the burial was excavated by the excavators of the Inamgaon habitation site, they had discovered the Chalcolithic artifacts kept inside the megalithic burial. So here we see an overlap where probably the continuation of the Chalcolithic habitation into making the megalithic burials was seen. There are a few other sites also in Maharashtra where we have such interesting evidences coming out after the excavations. So there is a news which was published in a newspaper, local newspaper, long back, wherein these megalithic boulders were published, and then the reporter says that now these will be destroyed because people have applied vermilion on it and they are now worshipping it. This is a very old photograph from the Deccan College Museum archive where the burials can be seen. You can see this circle of stones, the boulders, which in fact is the megalithic burial. But today, one of my students, Mr. Anand Kanitkar, when he went to the place, he found that there are some boulders still kept in the same shape, and then they are probably the burials which Didi Kosambi was talking about. So when we move ahead from the proto-historic period to, and when we go to the early historic period, which as I told you that the historical phase of Indian history is the phase for which we have the written material, we have the oral material, and we also have the material evidences. So this particular phase of Indian history starts in around 6th century BC. Generally speaking, that is the life, that is the beginning of the historical period where we see the life of Bhagwan Mahavir and Gautam Buddha. So from their point onwards, the proto-history stops and history begins. But this is a very artificial, man-made division, or made only with the convenience, for the convenience of the researchers, their research only. But then, can you hear me properly, Bharat, or somebody? Can you tell? Because my computer tells me that
No,
my
you are audible, very, very
We
audible.
can hear you.
okay, good, good. So from the 6th century BC, we don't see anything. At least there are no material evidences coming out from Pune. But then after around second, third century BC, sorry, second century BC, we have these rock cut caves in Maharashtra. Especially if we see the pan-Indian scenario, we find that the earliest datable man-made caves were made in the 3rd century BC in Bihar. But they were made by the Maurya ruler Ashoka, and then they were made for the Ajivika, the monks of the Ajivika sect. But here in Maharashtra, we don't find anything made for the Ajivikas. In Maharashtra, from 2nd century BC, we start seeing the caves made in the Sahyadri mountain ranges. In fact, when we see the percentage of caves made in India, we find that there are nearly 80% caves out of all the caves that were made in India. 80% of them are seen in Maharashtra. And out of those 80%, we have maximum of them are Buddhist caves. So here what you see, all these red dots indicate the Buddhist rock cut caves, mostly made from 2nd century BC to around 6th century, 7th century AD. And then there are some Hindu and some Jain caves also, but mostly maximum number of caves are the Buddhist caves. And you can also see that, or we'll see later in fact, that they are located on the trade routes. They are located on the trade routes which connect to important trade centers, or which are along the passes, the ghats, which help you cross the Sahyadri mountain ranges and come to the highlands of Maharashtra from the coastal regions. So in this way, we find that near every ghat, there are clusters of caves, and especially the Mumbai-Pune Ghat, which is known as the Bor Ghat, is also dotted with all the cave sites. Even the Nane Ghat is also uh, has also been used for so many years, and we see the emergence of caves over there. So when we see this particular phase, which is called as the early history, what we have around Pune is also interesting to be seen. What we see is there are settlements, there are archaeological excavations were carried out in these regions, and habitation areas have been discovered. So excavations where we have noted that there were settlements at Junnar, then the region around Songaon, then the region around Inamgaon also. Even though Inamgaon was Chalcolithic site, we also see the early historic habitation around Inamgaon. Then in Pauna Valley, at Shirwar, even near Indapur, etc. At all these places, coin hoards were also found. Along with the habitation remains, the pottery and the skeletons, burials, etc., or other implements. At many places, coin hoards were found. Hoard is a collection of coins made in the ancient times. And then at many of these places, we see the rock cut caves, especially the Buddhist rock cut caves. But the cave at Nanighat itself is a secular cave in a way. So there are many such caves which were also noted and documented. So this is a very historic photograph where we find that Dr. Shobhana Gokhale, who was the famous epigraphist and numismatist of Maharashtra, and then Dr. S.B. Dev, who was the ex-director of Deccan College, and Padma Shri Dr. M.K. Dhavekar. So this is Dr. Shobhana Gokhale, obviously, Dr. S.B. Dev and Dr. M.K. Dhavekar. All of them are examining the coins, which were there are 1,000+ coins which belong to the Western Chhatrapati period, that is belonging to around 1st centuries AD to 3rd, 4th centuries AD. So there were 1,000+ coins which were discovered at Ranjangaon. Yes, the famous Ashtavinayak, one of the Ashtavinayaka places, Ranjangaon, where some farmer had discovered this coin hoard and they had to study all these coins. So all of them are now studying the coins. You can see that coins are kept in a tray, and all of these were the Western Kshatrapa coins. Plus, there is a place called as Kazhad, near a village called as Kazhad near Indapur, where the coins of the 359 coins of the Traikudaka dynasty were also discovered. Those people living in Mumbai must be aware of the name Traikudaka because they were the rulers who were ruling even in Mumbai for a long time. And during their rule, many caves in Kanheri were excavated. But we also find that when we see these more than 300 coins found at Kazad, coming from 5th century AD, we can actually say that the extent of their empire had even spread up to Indapur or Kazad. Not on, they were ruling not only in Mumbai but also in the highlands and in this region. So we find the rule of the Traikudakas through this particular coin hoard. And then we were discussing about the trade routes and the passes to cross the Sahyadri mountain ranges. So here the map is self-explanatory, where you can see the trade routes in the dotted line. And then these are the cave sites. So you can see the cluster of caves on the Borghat road from Mumbai to Pune. And we also see the cluster of caves here at Junnar and even at Nasik. So it is seen that this is Maharashtra only, that there are in this part of the Sahyadri range we have so many caves even at Karad, then Khed, even Kolhapur, near Kolhapur. So all these are the important trade centers. Like if you see from Kolhapur, then Karad, Vai, Shirwal, Pune, even Junnar and Nasik. So these are the places, or even today, which are the first important places or cities when you cross the mountains, the Sahyadri mountain range, and come to a flat land and habitation area. So all these places, including Kolhapur, Karad, Pune, and Junnar, Nashik, all of them were very flourishing trade centers in ancient times or since ancient times. Out of them, Junnar, in fact, did not remain as a very important place because the trade routes changed and there were motorable roads later on. But for Nasik, where we have the Thalghat reaching to Nasik, which went from Mumbai to Nasik, then we also have Naneghat, which brought the traders to Junnar. Then we have Pune, for which we people generally don't know about the habitation in Pune, and they don't know what was there in Pune because excavations could not be carried out extensively in Pune. But then at Karad, where we see the Kumbharli Ghat coming in, and Karad has a cluster of more than 100 caves in and around Karad. Even Kolhapur, where excavations have been carried out and we have found the habitation site, etc. There is also a cave site called as Pohale. But then when we have so many caves between Mumbai and Pune, why don't we see anything in Pune? So we'll see what we have in Pune later on. But then we find that with the Satavahanas, we find that the Deccan was becoming a very important region for the trading purposes also, and then networking the hinterland trade that we had in India. So we find a lot of increase in the number of settlements in Western Deccan when the Satavahanas came up. So when we talk about the evidence coming from Pune, we have to rely totally on the excavations which were salvage excavations. What used to happen that the old part of Pune, the old Pune, those who are from Pune would know what I'm talking about, where we have the Kasba Pet, which is generally considered as the old Pune. But when we try to excavate the regions in Kasba Pet, there is no space available because everything is so thickly habitated that we don't have any open space to excavate. But when there are new constructions coming up, when the old vadas were pulled down and they were renovated, the new apartments were coming up, people had done some surveys. And accidentally also a lot of pottery, early historic pottery was unearthed because with the clay which they dug out from the foundations, a lot of things came up. And when they were studied by the archaeologists from Deccan College, of course, so they found out that at all these places, you can see the names of the vadas and then the numbers of the Kasbapet houses. Then they saw that everywhere over here there was the Satavahan period habitation. like ranging from around first century BC to around 3rd century AD at least. And the rough estimate of the spread of the habitation was around 10 acres. So here we find that for Pune at least, the chronology of Kasbapet was from 2nd century BC, we have Satavahanas. Then we have the Gupta Vakataka phase. Even though both the rulers were not ruling in Pune or over Pune or the region around Pune, we had their contemporaries, the Tregutakas, ruling over Pune probably. And then there were some foundations of structures which were also discovered during these excavations. And then accidentally also while doing repair works for the underground drains near Shaniwarwada, some Satvahana pottery was also discovered by the diggers. So in this way we find that during the salvage excavations, many remains indicating the habitation belonging to 2nd century BC and extending up to around 5th, 6th century CE was seen in the old city area, that is the Kasbapet and surrounding region. And then from the 7th century AD onwards, we start getting the inscriptions, we start getting the monuments in Pune itself. So even though we don't have any standing structural remains for the earlier phase, we have the pottery coming up, and the red ware, grey ware, black and red ware, red polished ware, and all these things. I think I'll have to hurry a bit. Were discovered, and they indicate the early historic nature of the habitation. Same is the case with the uh, regions around the places around Pune, where we have at Junnar, which was a very important trade center during the Satvahana polity, which has the largest, the biggest cluster of rock cut caves in India. And there are many inscriptions. There are more than 183 caves in and around Junnar. So what we see at Junnar today is a modern town which is sitting on the ancient habitation. So this was the period of about which we are talking. This is Satvahana Empire extending in this region, and we had these Western Chhatrapas ruling in northwestern regions. So these are some of the photos of the excavations being carried out at Junnar, where we can see the different layers being marked by the labels. And then this is a typical early historic saddle and quan where we have Pata Varvanta in Marathi, where which was found. This is called as a legged quan. So where we have four-legged uh, quan where people used to grind the grains. So this is a peculiarity of the Satvahana period where we have such saddle and quan combinations finding in Maharashtra. So when we talk about Naneghat, I think many of you or most of you know what Naneghat was. But for those who don't know what Naneghat was and is, these are some of the photographs. So this is the pathway. This is the region from where you can reach from Junnar, and this is considered as a toll collecting pot. So for Pune, Mumbai people, Toll Naka is a famous place, so a known place. Similarly, even at Naneghat, this is considered as a toll naka for ancient times. And then from here is the place where you enter, you come down. This is a view of Naneghat from the Jivdhan fort. There are many forts also on this in this region who guard the trade route. And then this again is Dr. Shobhana Gokhale, whom we saw when she was examining the coin hoard at Ranjangaon. So she had done a lot of work on the inscription in the cave at Naneghat. She used to go here. I think one of the participants who is there in our talk today, Mr. Kanaskar, can be seen over here, and his friend, and Dr. Shobhana Gokhale is here. She did a lot of study of the inscription which we have inside the Naneghat cave, where we have this Brahmi inscription in Brahmi script and Prakrut language on both the walls, right and left wall. And this is the back wall where there used to be the remains of the sculptures of the members of the Satvahana royal family, along with the names written on their top over here. And then they would tell you who was standing where. But then unfortunately, all the sculptures are broken, and you can see the remains of the legs or feet over there. But this is a courtesy Heritage India Communications Private Limited. They had made a reconstruction, a recreation of the whole statue gallery at Naneghat, and probably such was the composition or such was the sequence of the people who were shown standing in this particular cave. This is a very unique evidence which we have from Naneghat, and this is how the ghat, that ghat would go down across the mountains, and this is a very safe ghat. It is not that there are valleys or something, and this is not a motorable ghat. So you have to cross the ghat by on foot or with the help of the animals. You can load the things on the back of the animals, and you can walk or you can be on a horse and complete the journey. So this is how we have the Nane Ghat over here. And at the base of the Nane Ghat, we have two small villages. Today they are small villages called as Pradhan Pada and Vaisakhare. But Pradhan Pada is the Pada or the habitation of the Pradhan, the chief uh, of one of the very important officers in the royal administration, and Vaisakhare is Vaishya Gruha, the house of the traders. So these two villages are still there at the base of Naneghat, indicating the processes in those days, where people, it is believed that from Kalyan it is not very far, because when you go come down from this area and when you meet, because this road takes you to the Mahesh Ghat, and there you see the milestone which tells that Kalyan is only 60 kilometers. So from there, if you start from Kalyan and come to Naneghat, and if you want to climb the ghat during the day, you can come on the previous night, stay at Vaisakhare or Pradhanpada, and start climbing the hill in the morning, the pathway in the morning, and reach Zunnar in the daytime, during the daytime. And there would be bullock carts ready for the luggage to be shifted to the trade center, that is Zunnar. There are records in the Pune District Gazetteer coming from 1883 or something, where there was a person called as Colonel Sykes, and he says that he wanted to cross the Nane Ghat and come and he wanted to go to Kalyan through the Nane Ghat, but then he said that there was a traffic jam and he had to wait for 5 hours for the traffic to be cleared, because there were so many bullock carts in a row at the entrance of the Nane Ghat, where the luggage was being shifted and sent to Junnar, etc. He couldn't cross the Nane Ghat completely. So this is how we have the evidence coming from Nane Ghat region. But then we were talking about the cave architecture that we have in and around Pune. So we have basically caves of three, belonging to three religions, that is Buddhist caves, we have Jain caves, and we also have the Hindu caves. So here, when we see the function of these caves, we find that the Buddhist caves were basically residential places as well as temples where people would worship the stupa or the image of Buddha. Then for the Jains, their caves were rarely residential. Only a couple of caves have been identified as residential caves. Generally, they were temples. And of course, for the Hindus, the caves were temples only. So this is generally shown and generally known plan and elevation of Buddhist rock cut caves, where you have the Chaitya Gruha for as the temple where you worship the stupa, and then or the prayer hall where you worship the stupa, and then which is the representation of Gautam Buddha in an iconic form. And then we have the vihara where we have the residential quarters and where they would stay, the monks would reside over there. So here we find that there are caves, but then this particular cave, called the place called as Bhaja, is considered as the earliest cave in Western India because of various reasons, but we won't go into the details of those. But here we see on the pillar behind the stupa, here over here behind the stupa there is a pillar. These are octagonal pillars, and on many of the shafts of the faces of this octagon we have the images of Gautam Buddha painted on them. You can see this white cloth kept on his left shoulder, and his hand is in the Dharma Chakra Pravardhan Mudra like this, and indicating that he is giving his first sermon or lecture. So there are such caves in Bhaja, even at Karla. Karla today is famous for the Ekvira Devi temple, but then it has come up lately. But then after, we don't know the date of the beginning of the Ekvira worship at Karla. But then the Chaitagruha at Karla can be dated to around 1st century BC, where we have a huge pillar standing in the courtyard, where we have the lion capital, and these 4 lions probably indicate the Sarnath pillar capital, which was erected by Ashok in those days. So this is the interior of the Chaitagruha, and then the most interesting thing about Karla is there are various donations, and they are written. Karla was a crowd-funded activity, and then donations that the people had made for the creation of this particular cave site were recorded in the form of inscriptions on the pillars, and these pillars carry inscriptions in the Brahmi script and Prakrit language. But then the most interesting thing about it is that the donors were not Indians. I mean, some of them were, of course, Indians, but many of them were foreigners also, and foreigners in which we have the Ionian Greeks coming in. They were called as the Yavanas. There were many foreigners living in ancient India, and they used to identify themselves with different names. So when they said that they were Yavanas, they were Ionian Greeks. When they said that we are Shakas, then they were Scythians coming from Iran. And when they said that we are Pahlavas, they were also Parthians coming from Iran. So such foreigners had given donations for the creation of such a beautiful Chaitya Gruha, where we see such inscriptions in Brahmi written over there. And then when we see the cluster in Junnar, we find that there are more than 5 groups around Junnar of these caves, which make them to 183 plus caves in and around Junnar. So this group is called as Tulza Lena, where we have a very interesting circular Chaitya Gruha, which is unique for this part of the country. And then there is another group which is called as the isolated group, because it is isolated and it's difficult to access also. But it has a beautiful Chaitya Gruha and facade. And then we have a hill called as Manmodi Hill, wherein we have 3 groups. The first one is the Bhutalena. The Buddha Lena has become Bhutalena over the period of time. And then we can see the Chaitya Gruha and Vihar. So this is a general view of the Manmodi Hill, wherein there are 3 different groups. This particular group is called as Bhima Shankar group. And later we find the Amba Ambika. This is the close-up of the Bhima Shankar group. And these are those caves. We'll go quickly ahead because we have to see many other things also. So this is the Ambamika group of the Manmodi Hill, and we have this Ganesh Lena group, which is the Lenadri group, a famous Ashtavinayaka temple, which was in fact a vihara in ancient days. This is the Ashtavinayaka shrine at Lenadri, at Junnar, which is called as Lenadri. And then this was a vihar. You can clearly see the cells for the monks. Even Shivneri fort has 4 groups in it. And then 2-3 of them are very difficult to access, inaccessible only. But this one is a little bit accessible. And then there are many other caves also, other than Junnar. We have the caves at Shelarwadi, that is between Pune and Talegaon, which is called as Ghoravdeshwar also by people. But they are clearly Buddhist caves. There are Brahmi inscriptions which tell us, and then the stupa had been broken and made converted into a Shivalinga. Then there are Jain caves around Pune, but then there are 2 types of Jain caves. Some of the caves were made by the Jain devotees and for the Jain monks or devotees, and then other caves were initially Buddhist and they were converted into Jain caves. So this is a place called as Pale near Kamshet. A little bit difficult to access, but then it is very interesting because it has got the inscription in it. And then this is considered as the earliest Jain inscription in Western India, in Maharashtra. So here we see that water tank also and the inscription recording the donation. And then in Junnar, I have taken only 2 samples. So in Junnar, in the Amba Ambika group, what we see is the Jains had carved the images of Tirthankaras, and then they were worshipped as Jain caves later on when the Buddhists left the place. So they are also considered as Jain caves. But later on, today, what we see is these Ambika, the images of Ambika, is considered as that of Parvati. And the Hindus now worship these caves as their own caves. But when we come back to Pune, we have a very, very interesting and very, very important finding from, again, Kasba Pet, from the house of Mr. Lokhande. We have got this image partially broken but now retouched. Accidentally, the image was discovered from when the foundation of the house of Mr. Lokhande was being done or redone. And then this is around 2.5 to 3 feet image made in one single stone. And then the iconography, the attributes of the image they tell us that the image was created in around 3rd, 4th century CE. Why? Because if you see over here, you'll see that there is no Padma in the hand of Vishnu. See, Vishnu holds Shankha, Chakra, Gada and Padma as his attributes. But then prior to the Gupta period, we don't see Padma in the hand of Vishnu. So here we have Gada, and Gada has the Gada Devi at its base. Then we have Shankha with Shankha Purusha, and we have Chakra, and this hand is shown in the Abhaya Mudra. and there is no Padma held in his hand. That is why scholars like Dr. Deglurkar and many others have dated this image to the Kushana, maybe Traikutaka period, because similar image was also found from Panvel, I think, of Vishnu, they're probably dating to the same period, and Traikutakas were devotees of Vishnu. So probably this image was created around that time and was brought to Pune. But this is a very significant finding from the regions of Pune city itself. Then there are many other Hindu caves, because we are talking about the caves now. There are many other Hindu caves in and around Pune also. So one of the important caves is at the base of Harishchandragarh, which is called as Nageshwar. And considering the style of the pillars and pillar capitals, this cave can be dated to around 6th 7th century AD. And on Harishchandragarh itself, there is a cave of which only one pillar is left intact and two are hanging, and the fourth one is broken completely. But again, seeing on the basis of the style of the pillar or pillars, people have dated this to around 6th century, 6th 7th century C. So this is a very important thing, that on the fort of Harishchandragarh, we have a cave and probably living habitation also. When you make such a large cave and then there is a cell for the priest to live in, there probably was a habitation nearby who was using or who was worshipping this particular icon or image in the cave. So in this way, when we start getting many monumental remains from 6th, 7th centuries AD onwards, and when we come to the city of Pune, we have very important evidence coming from the Rashtrakuta period, that is around 8th century CE onwards. Here we find that the name Punya or Punaka occurs for the first time. Pune is known as Pune or Punaka Vishaya because it is located on the holy confluence of the two rivers. It is a holy place, it is a pilgrim place. So wherever you find a confluence of rivers in India, there is a Tirtha Kshetra, a pilgrim place. So when you take bath in the waters of the confluence of rivers, you attain merit, punya. So here in Pune, you attain merit whenever you take bath in the waters of these two rivers or the confluence of these two rivers. So it was called as Punaka Vishaya, and Vishaya means a large region or a district, as if we compare it to the modern terminology or administrative units. So Vishaya was district, and later on in around 10th century, we find that Pune had become a desha, a country, small country maybe, but then the administrative unit had increased from Vishaya or district level to the desha level. So this is very significant because the importance and the growth of Pune can be assessed through the names, the changing names of Pune coming through the copper plates. So the first evidence comes from the copper plates dated to around 758 and 768 AD, which were issued by the Rashtrakuta rulers, and then where we find the name Punaka Vishaya. And in the 10th century, we find which was a copper plate issued from Janjira, or which was found at Janjira of the Shilahara king Aparajita, and we find that which was given to a Brahmin from Karad, and where Desha was mentioned. And then we find that there is not only one confluence of rivers in Pune, the Mula and Mudha, but there are three confluences in and around Pune. We just saw the confluence of Pauna and Mula, where the Triveni Sangam Mahadev temple was there. Then we also saw that we should see the confluence of Ram and Mula, which is generally not known to people. People living in this hardcore city of Pune are not even aware of the Ram river in Pune. But then there is a small river called as Ram, and the river bed was encroached by the modern building activities. And some of the Punekars might remember the floods which were caused by the encroachment over the river bed a few years ago. And then now we can see the Ram river meeting Mula in the Baner region, and of course the Mula Mutha confluence is there. Near the river Mutha, we have a small cave, not a very small cave, in fact, a famous cave in Pune called as Pataleshwar, which where we see this circular Nandi Mandapa, and it's a Hindu cave, of course, Pataleshwar, and it is dug down in the ground. That is why it is like a dungeon, and that's why Patal Pataleshwar is the name of the cave. Here we see the Nandi Mandap, and for the same time we also have another cave site in Pune, again of which people are not aware, is the cave at in Baner, called as Baneshwar. This is the Lord of Baner, that is why Baneshwar. It was also excavated in around 8th century CE. It's an unfinished cave. People don't know about the authorship of the cave, so they write that this is a Prachin Pandav Nirmit Leni. But then this is a Rashtrakuta period Hindu cave. I know, Farooq. I'll be quick. Yeah. And then this is the interior of the cave. And here again there is a cave in Parvati, the famous Parvati hill of Pune, where there is, but there are no indications to date the cave as it is. And in the last phase of Pune, we find in our own time frame, we see that in 13th century, when the Yadavas were ruling in Pune, over Pune, or this region, there was a person, an officer called as Bada Arab, who was the Sardar of the Delhi Sultans. He attacked Pune, and with him came two Muslim saints called as Sheikh Salahuddin Ghazi Chisti, also known as the Elder or Thorla Sheikh Salah, and Sayyid Hisamuddin Qattal Janjani, also called as the Younger Sheikh Salah or Dhakla Sheikh Salah. So we see the tombs of both of these Sheikh Salahs in Pune, and then they were erected at the places where there were two Yadava period temples called as Narayaneshwar and Punneshwar. So these people, they destroyed these temples, and two dargahs were constructed at the same material, using the same material for the construction of the dargahs. You see that these are the Patayeshwar caves. This is the Kasbapet region, and then there are Dhaka Sheikh Salah and Thorla Sheikh Salah. This is Shaniwar Wada. So everything is so close by in that region. These are some of the photographs of the Dhakla and Thorla Sheikh Salah. And then recently in the riverbed, remains of a broken temple were also discovered. So we also find, and there are records that this Bada Arab had constructed a Pandriza court. It was called as Kille Hissar. The name, he had constructed a fortified mansion or a small fort, a fortress in Pune called as Kille Hissar, and it is recorded that it was called as a Pandriza court. Pandhar is the clay from the ancient habitation mound. So Pandhar is the name given to the clay which is whitish in color, and that is why it is called as Pandhar, and which in fact comes from the ancient habitation site. And then when we see that using that Pandhar or the clay taking out from the habitation site, this fort was constructed. This was an earthen fort, and then this tells us that Bada Arab had destroyed the ancient habitation of Pune, which was there in Kasbapet, because he had taken out all the soil from the earth, from the ground, and then he used it in the construction of the fort over there. And that is why we don't find, there are very few remains of the ancient habitation sites in Pune, because everything was destroyed by Bada Arab. So probably the old city had the Chalcolithic levels also, just as we saw at Sangvi. Similarly, probably in the old city there were such Chalcolithic sites, habitation sites, because there have been some undocumented reporting of the Chalcolithic potsherds in Pune. So it was they were not never published. So we cannot say for sure that they were the Chalcolithic potsherds, but some of the scholars claimed that they had discovered those potsherds. So we know that there are some memorial stones, the Sati stone and hero stones. So these are the hero stones. We just saw one at Sangvi. So they are there are many such hero stones in and around Pune. But then at Ranjangaon itself, which is one of the Ashtavinayaka places, we have such Satikam hero stone. Another one again. But then in Pune, we have a very interesting story to see. We find that Pune probably was a very important center of the Ganapatya cult. And that is why whenever we see the hero stones at the end, when we see the hero becoming Kailasavasi, he is shown worshipping Shivalinga. Everywhere he is shown worshipping Shivalinga. But in Pune, when we see the hero stones, we find that instead of Shivalinga, we have the image of Ganesha on it. So this particular temple is called as the Baloba Munjaba temple near Shaniwar Wada. And then here we have a four-sided hero stone, where we see the image of Ganesh. Similarly, in Pashan, there is a temple called as Someshwar on the banks of river Ram, where there was a very eroded hero stone. There still is, but the erosion is quite a large, and we can see the outline of Ganesh over there. Even at the entrance of the younger Sheksalla, Dhakla Sheksalla, we have a hero stone where Ganpati is shown as the presiding deity or the deity of the hero over there. In Pune, there is a temple which is considered as belonging to the Yadava period, which is called as the Nageshwara Temple, because there are references in Santa Namdev's Gatha of this particular temple, which is there near the Nagzari, which is a small stream today, Nala, but in those days it was a small river also. There are references and oral traditions telling us that there was a stepped tank, a huge tank near Nageshwar, which had waters with some healing powers. This stepped tank had more than 70 steps, 70 steps over there. But during the process of urbanization, everything was buried down and completely lost now. But then in the campus of Nageshwar, we have another memorial stone, probably a post-Yadava memorial stone, where we see on all the four sides different signs, but one of them is the Ganesha shown over here. Of course, Kasba Ganpati is considered as the Grama Devata of Pune. Generally, the Grama Devata of any habitation is Kala Bhairav or Bhairavnath. But here in Pune, we have Ganpati as our Grama Devat. And this particular image of Kasba Ganpati probably dates back to pre-Shivaji period, because Shivaji's mother renovated this temple. This is the modern temple of Kasba Ganpati. Another interesting thing is that in the Madhusanchay society in Karve Nagar, there is a suburb of Pune called as Karve Nagar. There is a Ganesh temple of the society itself. Those who are aware of the Asgard Stone would know that this is an Asgard Stone which was discovered over there, which has been there for so many years, and now the Ganesh temple has incorporated as a part of their own property. And then here, the Asgard Stone is the curse stone, a Shapa Vachana, where generally there are inscriptions, but sometimes there are no inscriptions and only sculptures are there to tell you that these are the curse stones. So the a donation used to be given, and the person who would destroy the donation, he was given a curse that his mother would be raped by a donkey. Gadhe Gala, this is called as Gadhe Gala. So here the mother of the person, the evil person, and she is being raped by this donkey. But then people, the local devotees have converted into a rat and sun and moon and something like that. But then this curse would last till the end of the sun and moon. That is what is suggested over here. And this is a pot-like thing. So probably this is a post-Yadava Asgard stone which was created in this region, and it is still kept there because in those days this was all of these were fields over there. And now after doing the NA, people have started constructing their houses. So around Pune also, we quickly will have a look. There are important temples like at Junnar, and then there are huge stepwells in Junnar also. The famous temple of Bhuleshwar is also not very far from Pune, and where we have this peculiar image of Vainayaki, the female form of Ganesh. Then there is a very interesting temple at Loni Bhapkar near Murgaon. I am not mentioning the Ashtavinayakas in this talk. And then we also have some interesting sculptures like the Yajna Varaha, where this is the animal form of Varaha, avatar of Vishnu, where you see many deities carved on its back. So this one is there in the fort of Chakan. So along with all these remains and numerous early habitation sites, many temples and memorial stones, etc., we find that there was a widespread habitation in the region of Pune and the surrounding regions. But then after the Yadava period, we find that there was a small disruption when Pune was called as Muhiyabad with the Islamic rule. And then after that, in the 17th century, when Chhatrapati Shivaji came in, Pune also again had its flourishing period. So prior to the Islamic rule, Pune was a flourishing trade center and a very important pilgrim place. But then everything was erased from the memory during that 200-300 of years. And again in 17th century or from 17th century onwards, we find that the Maratha rule, including the rule of the Shivaji Maharaj and of course the Peshwas, Pune became in fact, the Punekars were the rulers of the country, because when the Britishers defeated the Peshwas in 1818. The Union Jack was there over major part of the country. I'm sorry for extending my time, and then thank you very much for a patient hearing. If you have any questions, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Bhalerao. That was a fascinating trip over many centuries, many decades, if I may just put it in brief. So yes, there are questions. We'll take them one by one. Somebody wanted to know, what is the best place to start to learn more about this fascinating history? Are there any tour companies? Are there any? Of course, there will be books for which also people have asked recommendations.
See, over here you see Tiyak Maharashtra Vidyapeeth. That's my university where we have these courses in Indology, and
Yes.
where we teach you the ancient history, culture of India. And that's why it is called as Indology. Like we
Correct.
have Sinology,
Yes.
logos knowledge of China. So here we have the knowledge of India from all the perspectives, like history, social history, economic history, religious history, architectural, monumental history, and whatnot. Yeah.
So that answers Satish's
But
question. There are a few questions about.
for Mumbaikars also, there are a lot of openings in Mumbai where you have many courses being run by various colleges under the name of Ancient Indian Culture. So you have the Asiatic Society running some courses, and they have launched a
Yes.
online course recently. But then there are many other colleges like Sathe College, Xavier's and all, even extramural studies in Mumbai University. They have an MA also in this subject. Yes.
Okay. There are two other questions on etymology. Dr. Kelkar wants to know, what was Pune called before the Rashtrakuta period?
We don't know. There are no sources. Probably something related to Punya, Punaka. That is why Pune has come. Punya, probably, generally people believe that Punya is the name. Punya is the thing that you get after taking bath in at a pilgrim place or in the
Correct.
confluence of rivers. So
Correct.
you attain a lot of Punya living in Pune. You see, you get to listen to Punekars, and many people are attending the lecture from Pune because they are Punyavana people.
Yes, they are blessed.
Yeah.
How did the name Baner originate? Is it any relation to the Shaiva Ban?
No idea actually. It's an old name, a locally regional. I mean, the habitation at Baner also goes back to 7th, 8th centuries AD, and then
Okay.
there could be older habitation also, but we are not. I mean, excavations and explorations have not been carried out in Baner. I mean, there is no
When
ecological explanation as such.
okay. So when one refers to the Nanigat inscriptions, the name of this Satvahana queen, Naganika, comes up very often.
Yeah.
Ashish Kelkar was asking if you could elaborate a little more on the mention of her name in the inscription.
In fact, the main inscription of Naneghat on both the walls does not mention her. But
Okay.
the label inscriptions, one of the label inscriptions, which is written on the top of the statues over there, it mentions the name Devi Naganika, and along with her husband, Siri Satakani.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but people have, scholars, or those who reconstructed the history of the region with the sources like the Naneghat inscription, they have told us, which is sometimes questioned by the modern scholars now, that who was the writer of the who was the donor of the inscription and the cave at Naneghat, because the most important reason for this is in India, when you die, of course, with some exception, I am telling this, when you die, then only your statue is erected. The exceptions are, of course, of some political leaders during whose lifetime they themselves create their own statues. But otherwise, unless you die, your statues are not erected. So when you see a rock cut statue of Naganika being carved in Naneghat, so some people say that this must be a posthumous cave or posthumous inscription. But
Okay.
there is a mention of her father, and who
Okay.
was the Maharathi person, and his name is there in the as a label inscription and also in the inscription. So probably she was the daughter of this Maharathi family, and that is why his statue is still there in the statue gallery at Naneghat.
Okay.
And they were important people from Maharathi, Maharashtra. The name Maharashtra has come, and the name
Another question.
yeah.
Sorry. Another question also from Dr. Ashish Kelkar. He asked if the Inamgam part of the late Jorave culture.
Yes, yes, late Zorwe, of course. Or early Zorwe is also there, and late Zorwe is also.
Both are present. Okay. The question from Parvez is that in Hindu periods like the Vedic period, which predated Buddha or the Jain times, in this particular region which you spoke about today, the Buddhist cave making activities seem to predate the Hindu caves. Is that correct?
That's
I mean,
the cave at Naneghat mentions the Vedic sacrifices that the king and queen had performed. So, if you want to call it a Hindu cave, then you can. Otherwise, it's a secular cave, a memorial cave also probably for the remains, because you see the
okay.
remains, the statues of the people. But then it is so because we should see the function of the caves. Why the caves were carved, or why the caves were
Mm-hmm.
excavated? Because constructing a building is lot much easier than excavating a cave, because if you make a
Mm-hmm.
mistake while making a cave, there is no alternative. You cannot change whatever you have done. But then if you make a mistake while constructing a building, you can replace the stone, but in a cave you cannot do that. That's a more risky option for
Mm-hmm.
having a habitation. So, but these monks, they needed viharas, the
Yes.
monasteries, for the rainy season, and then
Mm-hmm.
they also needed maintenance. And then who would give the money for the maintenance, because they didn't have much money, they had left everything behind. So to have eternal residences in the caves, such caves were created. In fact, there was no need for the Hindus to have their caves. They should have been happy with the temples that they had got, because these their
Correct.
caves are temples only. But then there are some other aspects also of Hindu caves, which I should not go into details right now. But then another thing is here, over the period of time, we find that as long as your donation exists, you
Mm-hmm.
accrue the merit out of it. As
Oh,
long as the donation exists, that is till the end of the world, you will be accruing the merit of the creation of the donation. So
of the donation.
when your donation is destroyed or it's finished, you stop getting the merit. So for getting the punya also, in the everlasting medium, they had created the case, and also for
Mhm.
practical purpose, non-maintenance architecture.
And the last question is from Ganti Indraganti. They want to know if there are any recommendations on books and literature which document the cultural philosophical aspects of life. The cultural philosophical aspects of life in
Overall,
Pune,
or in Pune.
in Pune in the 8th and 9th century.
You should see the gazetteer of Pune
Okay.
district. Yeah, that would give you a lot of information which was documented during the British period. You see,
Mhm.
unfortunately, prior to the Britishers, we did not have this habit of documenting things. Or if we had, the documents were destroyed during the Islamic rule. Because what we have are their documents now. We don't have anything that was created prior to the Islamic rule. But then we don't know whether the material had perished, because if they were writing on paper, the paper would have gone. Only if they had written on stone and copper plates, the material is still there. Otherwise, everything is vanished.
Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the session, Dr. Bhalerao. Except I want to read one comment which sort of summarizes all the compliments which just come in. Jatin Lodaya says that when he comes to Pune now, he's going to see it with a different pair of eyes.
Thank you. That's
Okay,
what
so
the aim was, I think. For
correct, yes. So such a fascinating talk and about a topic which not many people outside academia know about. So thank you very much for that. Thank you everybody for attending.